So by way of review, let's read. We're in lesson 39 in our Roper books, the red books. We were in pages 367 through 371. We were reading three parallel passages: Matthew 8, Mark 4, and Luke 8. I'm going to read from Mark 4. I'm going to read Mark's account only for review, mostly because there's a review question about Mark 4 and verse 41 at the end of our lesson today. So, Mark 4, starting in verse 35, it states, "On that day when evening had come, he said to them, 'Let us go across to the other side.' And leaving the crowd, they took him with them in the boat, just as he was, and other boats were with him. And a great windstorm arose, and the waves were breaking into the boat, so that the boat was already filling. But he was in the stern, asleep on the cushion. And they woke him and said to him, 'Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?' And he awoke and rebuked the wind and said to the sea, 'Peace, be still.' And the wind ceased, and there was a great calm. He said to them, 'Why are you so afraid? Have you still no faith?' And they were filled with great fear and said to one another, 'Who then is this that even the wind and the sea obey him?'" So I started out the class on Sunday talking about the differences in each one of these accounts. And to me, what is noticed very quickly is that Matthew's account, again, this is review, uses the term Lord, right? The disciples refer to Jesus as Lord. Lord, do you not care about us? Lord, do you not know what's going on? Mark uses the word teacher. And then Luke uses the word master, master, or the term master, master. Okay, so I like to see some of these differences, and as we have learned earlier, way back in January, because I taught the very first few lessons, that each one of these letters was likely intended for a different group of individuals, first readers, right? Matthew likely written to a predominantly Jewish audience as a first reader, Mark to likely Gentiles, and even Luke perhaps the Gentiles as well. So I noticed that difference right away, and I looked up all the Greek words, and they are slightly different. So indeed, there is a definitive difference there in how their first readers would have interpreted the scene here, or what was going on. Next, I talked about how Matthew uses the term sea and sea as reference to the water, the Sea of Galilee. Mark uses sea and sea, and Luke uses lake and water, lake and water. And we're going to talk about why it's significant, especially at least in Matthew's account, that he uses the term sea twice, right? Uses the term sea twice. Another thing that is different between the three, two of these gospel writers have the rebuking of the disciples after he calmed the storm, and one of them has before calming the storm. I believe it is Matthew's account who has Jesus rebuking the disciples before he rebukes the storm. Let's see here. Yeah, Jesus in Matthew's account has Jesus rebuking the disciples before he then rebukes the winds in the sea, and then there was great calm. So again, I find that stuff interesting. The Mark records that there were multiple boats. There were multiple boats. Could have been two, three. It just says more than one? It sounds like. So it could have been other followers, whomever. The boat would have been big enough to fit 12 to 15 people in it. So certainly enough for Jesus and his 12 disciples. Jesus was asleep, and we're going to talk a lot about this. Excuse me. Mark talks about it was evening. Now, again, if we understand how they kept time in the Jewish, Hebrew, Greco-Roman world, was it was basically midnight, 3 a.m., 6 a.m., 9 a.m., 12 noon, and then it was 3 p.m., 6 p.m., 9 p.m., 12 a.m. And so the term evening, it doesn't say if it was early or late, but it could have been just before 6 or much after. We don't really know. But Mark is the only one that indicates that it was evening. It was after, of course, the parables. Jesus was asleep in the stern of the boat on a cushion. Right, the stern is in the rear of the boat. The cushion was likely some kind of animal hide filled with sheep's wool or something like that. To row across the Sea of Galilee was supposed to take a few hours, it says. And it was roughly 6 to 7 miles wide. And Matt preached on it Sunday. And what was it, 15 miles long, something like that, Matt? And so, yeah. And so to me, I wrote in my notes, this is no easy task, whether there's wind or not. This is no easy task to go 6 miles in a boat. Um, they didn't have an outboard, right? Ben, it would not be so big of a deal if they had an outboard, right? And Evinrude and Johnson, those are old school things, but it wouldn't have been so big of a deal. But here, they're in a boat. There likely would have been at least one mast and a sail, and certainly oars. Um, the storm came. The disciples were filled with great fear. Every one of the three um, gospels records this with slightly different words. Mark says, "Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?" So they thought they were going to die, or that they would end up in the water. Matthew's account. Probably should have put a couple bookmarks in here. Matthew's account has, "Save us, Lord, we are perishing," again, and then Luke 8. Says, "Master, Master, we are perishing." So the idea of that we were perishing, the disciples were in great fear for their life, um, they also had a lack of faith, right? They also had a lack of faith, and Jesus points this out in one form or another, in either all three of the gospel accounts or in one or two more directly. We have to remember that, up until this point, everything that Jesus said or did or said he was going to do would happen. He if he said he was going to go to the other side of the shore, he was going to go to the other side of the shore. And so they didn't have faith and trust in what Jesus had said to them. And when a storm arose, they became very, very concerned. The Sea of Galilee was 700 feet below sea level. That's also a review question, so good thing we're going over this. It was surrounded by mountains as high as 9,200 feet with Mount Hermon around the sea. The boat starts taking on water pretty quick. And again, this could have happened sometime during early evening, maybe maybe still light, maybe not. And again, I said this on Sunday. I really am a pretty good swimmer. Um, I did swimming, all kinds of swimming from an early age, and junior lifeguards in Newport Beach, and having to qualify to swim that, and all kinds of stuff. We were constantly at the beach. I'd go so far out, my parents would be so scared, and my dad would always say, "Hey, the ocean's very unforgiving, Jason." And I'm like, "Yeah, all right, yeah, no, I know." But but I can swim. I can. I mean, I also can float because I have some flotation built into me. But to be sinking at night in the middle of the Sea of Galilee, we'd all be really scared. We'd all be really scared, especially in the storm, right? Waves, huge swells, and the disciples were really, really scared. So again, the Greek word used for evening in Mark's account indicates that it was late. That's how it's translated. Simply means late, late in the day. All right, let's see. I need to pick up. Okay, let's pick up here, which we kind of dabbled in. What time is it? Oh, I got plenty of time. The miracle, right? Christ rebukes the storm. Roper calls this a double miracle, I think, in the sense of because he calms the winds and the waves. He separates it. Roper does. It's certainly a miracle that he just calmed everything. The entire storm, and that's fine that it's a double miracle. The winds and the waves were made calm immediately. And Roper adds that typically when the winds stop, the waves would continue to roll for some time, and they cease immediately, both the wind and the waves. This had a major impact on the disciples as they asked themselves the question, what kind of man is this? And that's found in Matthew 8:27, Mark 4 4:41 says, and they were filled with great fear, right? The idea of reverence, and said to one another, who then is this that even the wind and the sea obey him? We're going to talk about how that would have been that actual action, witnessing somebody rebuke and stop a storm and have control over the wind and especially the sea, how that would have greatly impacted the Jewish mind. Greatly impacted the Jewish mind. So likely the readers of Matthew would have really picked up on this. In fact, no less than 4 times do we read the accounts in the Gospels, and it may even be 4, 4, and 4, which would make 12 times. Jesus has 4 separate events or recordings um, written in Scripture regarding the Sea of Galilee. When he walks on water, that one's even a bigger deal, especially in the Jewish mind. But this is still going to impact the Jewish thinking. So, what kind of man is this? Right? They're beginning to they are Jesus is revealing himself more and more to the disciples who this really is. He has the authority and the power to literally stop a storm in the blink of an eye. This is starting to build some faith, build some trust in the disciples. It's not shortly after this account that Peter has his great confession that thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God. Right? So things are beginning to happen. The disciples are being witnesses to the signs and wonders. And so, again, this encourages them. In regards to the sea, any Jewish believer reading any of the 3 accounts, especially of Matthew, the calming of the storm and the sea would have there would have been a deeper connection, a deeper, profound understanding than perhaps a Gentile believer. This was because of a belief in Hebrew custom, in Hebrew tradition, in Jewish heritage, that the sea was associated with death and destruction and was the home of primeval darkness, decay, demonic powers, and other things like that. And Jesus could calm the sea just like that. So he could calm all those things. He had power over death and darkness and primordial evil and things of that nature, because that's how the Jewish believers and Old Testament folks that lived in the Old Testament under the old law would have understood the sea. Would have understood the sea. Um, Supposedly, that's where, and I'd have to go back and look, even though I took 2 classes on Job. That was where either the behemoth or the leviathan lived in the water. Those were 2 big old beasts. Most scholars believe one or both represented um, evil and really Satan, and then the other one represented goodness, holiness, Christ, light, things of that nature. Because God, actually, when he talks about those beasts, he actually brags about both of them. So it's interesting. My dad and I have really deep theological conversations about the existence of evil and where it came from and things of that nature. Nevertheless, Jesus actually brags about both of them in Job, that he created them, he has this purpose for them, and that they cannot be basically destroyed by any human effort or even the greatest of technology and weaponry during that time. So, anywho, the sea in the Jewish mind would have been associated with death, darkness, Sheol, which is the Hebrew word for the place, the realm of the dead, primordial evil, and things of that nature. And here we have Jesus calm it all like that. Yes.
Perishing and perishing. To me, in their whole mind, they have gone years and learned about all these boats that have perished in this
Right.
sea already. This is on their mind.
Right.
I can understand that their thought that they're perishing.
Absolutely. Right. They wake up Jesus, but Jesus has never calmed a storm in front of them before. But what's interesting is they still had enough faith, a little bit of faith, to at least go to Jesus with their concerns, right? Um, Something we didn't talk about, and I want to talk about now, you kind of brought it up, which was good, but absolutely. dozens and dozens, if not hundreds of boats would have been at the bottom of the sea because of the storms that regularly affected the Sea of Galilee. Dozens and dozens and dozens. So yes, it definitely would have been on their mind. Mind you, what a third to a quarter of the disciples were fishermen who would have fished on the Sea of Galilee regularly. So they would know, they would have known what it was like. But I wanted to get to, and it's probably in, okay, we're going to get to it. So, okay, applications for the lessons to learn, or application for the lesson to learn. We need to ask the same question: what kind of man is this? Right? And again, to us, we read these accounts, the things that Jesus did, and he did many other things, right? John says so himself. I think the very last few verses of his gospel did many other things that aren't recorded because there's not a binding big enough, so to speak, right? But John says we wrote these things so that you may believe. We have what we need to believe, right? And what kind of man is this? Well, he's one that has the power to calm a storm. He has the power to take gigantic waves and swells based upon wind and calamity and immediately have them cease. He has the authority and power over nature. He created it, right? He created it, John 1:1. Actually, yeah. So he has the authority and power over everything, including death. He overcame death. Roper says, it is odd that they continually had to ask this question, which they did. The disciples did. They would ask themselves, if you read the Gospels, and you don't have to read Mark 4 and Matthew 8 and Luke 8, you can read Mark 6 and other accounts. And it's not just in the Sea of Galilee, it's other places where these things, Jesus reveals through signs and wonders his authority and his power. And to support the claim that I'm the Son of Man. I am in the Father and he is in me.
Mark's count where says that they feared exceedingly and said to one another, who can this be that even the wind of the sea obey him? That this fear was still of the storm, although it had been calm, or the fear, if you will, of the power that Jesus had.
Yeah, that second one, the latter one. Yeah, it would in fear. I'd have to go back and look up that Greek word, but it could be translated as reverence or like great respect, or to be in awe. Right. Well, if it's phobos, that's where we get our modern day word for phobia. So if it is the Greek word phobos, it would be phobias. But to me, it is this extreme awe and wonder of this man who we've been walking with. We've been seeing him perform his ministry in his confirmation of his word and who he is, and yet he still continues to wow us. That's kind of what I get at. And again, if we connect some of the ideas of the historical and cultural and traditional thinking of what the sea was all about, Jesus rebukes that. Are the disciples starting to realize that his claims of I'm going to overcome death, you know, I'm going to return back to God, all these things, are they starting to make that connection that maybe he does have authority and control over the darkest of darkest, evil, demonic powers and things of that nature? So I think it has to do with what Jesus did, and how he did it. He simply just said, "Peace be still," um, and especially Mark's account. So when the storm came, Jesus was sleeping. This makes us wonder, why was he able to sleep? Every time I have read this in each account, I'm always dumbfounded. I really am. I don't know what it is. I'm way too young to have sleeping issues, but I do. It could be perfect temperature, the cleanest sheets, the softest sheets. I could have the clearest mind, and sometimes I stay there staring at the ceiling. And yet here's Jesus, who is being literally or it sounds like there's the potential for being tossed in a boat. He's not being tossed because he's asleep on in the stern on a cushion, but it's big enough waves that it is filling the boat, and he's still asleep. This has always baffled me. I don't disbelieve it. I mean, I believe it, but I always think, how did he do that? Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I've been on small boats on lakes. I don't think I've ever been on a fishing charter boat doing deep sea fishing or anything like that, but I don't know if I'd be able to sleep on a boat that was rocking pretty good. Yeah.
The water is really powerful. I mean, if you've never been out on the ocean and the rough stuff, it's it's kind of scary, and it's when you're and even and I have been on those boats like you're talking about the big fishing charter boats, and when you're at the dock and you see that thing sitting there in the water, it's huge. These things are 60, 70 feet long, and they look very sturdy and very seaworthy looking. And then you get out there in the ocean, you get way out off the coast, and you can barely see the land, and you don't feel so big anymore. You're like a little cork up there bobbing around, and then the waves get rocking and stuff, and that's on a big boat. And I can imagine these guys having seen what they've seen as their experience as fishermen and seeing boats sinking and things like that. And those boats weren't exactly as seaworthy as modern boats. And it's easy to think like maybe like, oh, I don't know what these guys were afraid of because they had Jesus with them. I wouldn't be scared about something like that. But if he was just down there taking a snooze and it's getting worse and worse and worse, I'm afraid I'd start getting a little concerned. I have to admit.
Yeah, oh, absolutely.
But yeah, so it gets really, it can be pretty scary.
Some of these modern aircraft carriers are over a football field long, like 380 feet long.
Excuse me. I said 380 feet. Yeah. Well, okay. I'm trying to show that I know something that I don't know. But as big as these modern aircraft carriers are, naval pilots, especially jet pilots, when they land on them, they say it's like trying to land on a postage stamp in the middle of the ocean. And so here's a gigantic craft in the ocean. And yes, indeed, when you're out there in the middle of something, regardless of the size of the boat, a lot of times you can feel small. I always was like, man, how was he able to sleep? And so Roper has some ideas. He says Roper's real big on the idea that he was exhausted. Okay, I don't know if it actually ever says he's exhausted in Scripture. So, but he very likely could have been. Right? He could have been very tired from a day on his feet, teaching in parables and things like that. Right? I propose that I feel that Jesus regularly tested his disciples in small tests and large tests throughout the 3 years or so that he was doing his ministry. Perhaps this could have been some kind of a test. Um, but Rober continues to say, however, it also has to do with the fact that he is God, and it also probably has to do something with his faith and his faith in general and the faith in his Father. Jesus knew what he was on earth to do. Um, Perhaps from a pretty early age. Right, but and what I'm saying, right, his time, yes, certainly. He was not going to become the Lamb of God by perishing in a, boating accident and drowning to death, right? There was going to be something else there. And again, Jesus knew, I think from an early age, certainly by teenage years, he probably knew where he was headed if it wasn't closer to 12 when he was studying in the temple and asking these questions as a boy, right? Being left behind by accident. Um, there's a contemporary Christian song, and I'm not trying to promote anything. You do what you want to do on your personal time. But it's written. The song is by a guy by the name of Todd Agnew, and it was one of my favorite songs 20 years ago. And it was a song about throughout the song it said, "Did you know?" And it would say, "Did you know?" And then it said, "Would the cross cast a shadow over your cradle?" And so I always liked that song because it made me think, how much did Jesus know and when did he know? And so, like I said, that's an old song, um, but I believe that yes, he knew that his time had not come, that the sacrifice, so to speak, the atonement, the propitiation of sins was not going to happen then and there. He had faith. He had faith that he was going to get to where he was supposed to be going that night, and that it wasn't his time. When he calmed the storm, he rebuked his disciples and called them men of little faith. This happens again later in, I think, Mark 6, when Jesus walks on water, what he says to Peter. What he says to Peter about his faith. Let me see here. I just turned to it. Yeah, it is in Mark 6. I'm trying to read it real here. Okay, so it's not in Mark's account. So in one of the right, so in one of the other accounts, I believe Jesus calls out Peter's lack of faith. Because in that account, and I really want to find it. I actually have a sermon on it. I preached it here at Ripon when we were having services outside, actually. But the idea is Peter asks Jesus, "Tell me, command me to come to you." Matthew 14, probably. Anyways, and Peter does, but the moment he starts taking his eyes off of Jesus and he realizes he's actually walking on water and it's a stormy sea, he begins to sink. And he cries out to Jesus. And so, anywho, we got to start wrapping this up. Right. Speaking specifically to Peter. And what's amazing is, I mean, we know Peter basically breaks a vow, breaks a promise to Jesus himself that I will go where you go, Jesus. I will suffer what you're going to suffer. I will go to death with you. And yet Jesus says, before the rooster crows 3 times, you will deny me. So, you have little faith. That's very interesting how that comes full circle, right? To what Peter and Jesus have that conversation about when Jesus says, "Do you love me?" Peter says, "Of course I love you." And if you understand that account, each time Jesus says, "Do you love me?" it's 3. Each time it's a different Greek term for deeper and deeper love. And on the third one, the deepest one, Peter begins to weep, and Jesus says, "Then feed my sheep. Then feed my sheep." Okay, we're kind of getting off track here. We're having fun. So he calls men of little faith. Would he say that about us? Would he say that about us? I think the answer is probably yes. At different times in our lives. Let's just be real. At different times of our lives, we would probably say yes. Maybe not in this exact moment here together. We're here for study. We've had a good prayer. But when the storms of life, both physically and metaphorically, hit us, yeah, sometimes I question where my faith is. Right? My prayer for my brother. I mean, he is not terribly concerned that he may lose his job, but he might. And my encouragement will be, dude, you're going to be taken care of. You're not going to end up on the street. You guys aren't going to end up homeless or anything like that. Okay, just go do what you've done 3 or 4 other times and live with your in-laws. No, I'll tell him I said that. So, anyways, where is your faith, ye of little faith? But again, would he say that about us? Perhaps occasionally, maybe early in our faith, in our walk, whatever that may be. How do you show your faith in storms? That's the question. That's a question for us. How am I doing? Oh, I got lots of time. How do we show our faith in storms? Here's something I don't do very well. I've had conversations with John about this, and my mom and dad know this, but when storms of life hit me, I shouldn't get so anxious. Shouldn't get so stressed and anxious. Start to worry. When you worry, it shows a lack of faith. And I'm guilty of it as much as anybody else. That anxiety. And it's always about pretty ridiculous things. The way my mind works, unfortunately, is I go from 0 to a million miles an hour in a blink of an eye. Unfortunately, I'm still working on faith and a Christian worldview in my application to the circumstances of my life, good and bad. But yeah, I'll always fear the worst. Where does that come from? That's kind of frustrating. But yeah, how would we show our faith in storms? I think for not getting overly anxious, not getting overly worried about something. I heard a sermon, not a sermon, it was a class by a deacon down at Woodward Park Church of Christ. They actually asked him to be an elder, and he was like, "Well, here's some personal things going on with my kids and various things," so he decided to postpone that. But his class was on worry and letting Christ truly give you peace. And he was talking about how in his personal life, a few years before this, that it was David Locke. You kind of remember him. He was in the Army. He was a helicopter mechanic in the Army, but he had worked really hard and he became an administrator at an elementary school. So he's making that money. Um, he's got and he never had this extravagant lifestyle. So when I say, if I use the word lifestyle, don't think it as sinful, but he got used to that kind of income. He budgeted for that kind of stuff. Well, bad times hit, right, and within the schools, '08, 2009, 2010, and it lingered a little bit longer, and he was basically forced back in to being a teacher again. And as their district kind of got smaller, he was worried, not worried, but there was a chance for him to get squeezed out, maybe, right? Get a layoff notice. We call it pink slip in education. But his faith, when he taught that class, he's like, what can they do to me? I mean, what's the worst that the school district can do to me? Lay me off? Fire me? They can't take my life? I mean, when he said that, I was like, man, I wish I had faith like that. You know? It's amazing. And I do think about stuff like that, and I do remember his words now. How can we summarize this story and compare it to the storms that we face in this life? We kind of just were doing that, right? Um, to try to have faith, right? To trust that Jesus is in the boat with us. Not only is he in the boat with us, but he cares about us. In fact, one of these accounts, do you not care about us? Right? Wow. You said that to God in the flesh, who's going to give his life for your life? Do you not care about us? I think that's the idea, is the way Satan tends to work, right? He wants to work on our weaknesses. In fact, if I really think he enjoys and likes to make insecure Christians. You hear that? Insecure Christians. They perhaps doubt their relationship with Jesus or God the Father. They doubt that they're fully loved or doubt that they're fully forgiven. And I was reading something and I liked that. Satan likes to have insecure Christians because it makes sense. You know, my anxieties over certain things, that's insecurity. But if we always remember that Christ is in the boat with us and that he does care for us, I mean, no matter what we're going through, we could have some of the worst, deepest, darkest depression and anxieties and physical ailments and all that kind of stuff. And just because we have that does not mean that Christ does not still love us and that he's not still with us right there going through those same things. Over and over, you find it in James, you find it in other places about how overcoming these difficulties in life will make us stronger. That's what it says. You pass the test. Tribulation will make us stronger in the long run. Perhaps he's making us more and more holy. Perhaps he's perfecting the work he began in us. Storms are going to come. If we have the right faith, we can sleep through them. We should never forget that we have Christ in our boat. Let us put our faith in him. Let's go over these questions real quick. Kids are getting let out, but I have at least 1 minute. So I'm going to go over the questions that you have all the same ones, but the one I have is for the kind of the teachers. It's a little bit, it's the individual study guide. It has 11 questions. Number 1 is, what is an important theme found in the disciples' words in Mark 4:41? Now this is not, I don't want to say subjective, but there could be multiple themes because the questions say an important theme. I came up with the power and authority of Jesus is equal to God the Father. Again, in the Jewish mind, there was only one, not person, but there was only one individual, one God, one Spirit that could ever calm a storm. You find that in Psalms. You also find it in Jonah, in Job, and that was God the Father. So now, in the Jewish mind, having God in the flesh do this, it's revealing more and more realities of who Jesus is. Does anybody else have something about an important theme? Right. So faith, the building of faith, evidence for that faith. Number two, right, show his deity. Number two, why did Jesus withdraw from Galilee? I wrote, he may have needed a break from the crowds, and he may have been very, very tired. Where is the stern of the boat located? It's in the back. What is the meaning of the cushion in Mark 4:38? And again, we went over this a couple times, but some kind of pad, likely an animal hide stuffed with wool. I think even Roper says it was, what's the term? Not lanolin, but basically wool rolled up. La fleece, that's what he said. Excellent, thank you. No, pillow. Feather down. To what was the Sea of Galilee subject to? Mighty storms, strong winds. Number 6, the Sea of Galilee. The Sea of Galilee was how many feet below sea level? It was roughly 700. I think the number is actually like 680 or something like that. What surrounded the Sea of Galilee? Mountains. Some as big. Oh, did I skip one? No, I'm good. Mountains, some as big as 9,200 feet. That's 9,200 feet in elevation. Yeah. Number 8, what enabled Jesus to sleep through the storm? I put his faith and trust in God, God the Father. Number 9, how did Jesus calm the winds and the waves? He rebuked them. He commanded them. He simply spoke. Right? How is that? How does that connect with God and Jesus? Really, the Godhead. But I don't want to. Okay. Spoke everything into existence. Just spoke. He didn't have to do nothing. He didn't have to rub his hands together, and he didn't have to get dirt. And he just spoke it into existence. Number 10, how quickly did the winds and the waves subside? Immediately. Man, again, that would be something to see. And just boom, like that. Number 11, what did the disciples cry out after Jesus had stilled the storm? I said, who is this? And I put ... and I put man. Because again, each gospel is slightly different. The three recordings. So who is this man? Hey, thanks for your attention. I think Wayne should be back and prepared for Sunday. And then actually, I'll be taking over for 2 months in December and February on Sundays and Wednesdays. So, hey, thanks for being here. Thanks for being here.